What happens when a courtroom becomes a battlefield, and the judge forgets whose side justice is supposed to be on? Adrian Locke walked in calm, composed, his custom suit crisp, his gaze focused. To the public, he was a tech tycoon. To his enemies, a threat. But to Judge Marilyn Cross, he was nothing more than a headline waiting to happen. "Mr. Locke," she sneered, loud enough for every reporter to catch it. "I don't care how many zeros you have in your bank account. Here, you're just another arrogant man thinking money equals immunity." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cameras clicked like gunfire. The nation watched in stunned silence as a billionaire, calculated, powerful, untouchable, was publicly humiliated by the very woman meant to uphold fairness. But here's what no one knew. Adrian wasn't the villain. He was the target. And Judge Cross. She wasn't just out for justice. She was out for blood. She mocked him, belittled him, made a spectacle of his silence. What she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that Adrian had walked into that courtroom knowing exactly what he was doing. Because beneath the courtroom drama, a storm had been brewing. Files had been collected. Surveillance had been reviewed. A secret had been uncovered, one that would flip everything upside down. In just a few minutes, the gavel would fall. But not the way she expected. Because this wasn't just a trial. It was a trap, and the judge was about to become the judged. Adrian Locke wasn't always rich. In fact, there was a time he could barely afford rent, coding through the night on borrowed Wi-Fi in a one-bedroom apartment he shared with 2 roommates. His company, Link Systems, wasn't just a business. It was his life's work. A revolutionary platform that exposed data misuse and corruption within powerful institutions. It made him both a hero and a target. But as Links grew, so did the enemies, in high places. He didn't care for politics, never bought into the elite social clubs or their quiet handshakes. That's what made him dangerous. Unlike the others in the tech world, Adrian didn't play by their rules. He exposed them, and that's exactly what Judge Marilyn Cross couldn't tolerate. On paper, she was the golden face of justice, respected, iron-willed, and praised for her tough stance on white-collar crime. But off the record, she was deeply embedded in the same corporate circles Adrian had been investigating. He had stumbled upon it accidentally, buried in a data dump from a whistleblower. Secret offshore accounts, evidence of judicial bias, backdoor meetings with lobbyists, and then the name, Marilyn Cross. He didn't make it public. Not yet. Adrian believed in the system, naively perhaps. He thought that by following the law, by building a case, he could expose her the right way. He filed a lawsuit, not directly against her, but against one of the corporations connected to her. That's when things started to shift, subtly at first. A denial of evidence requests, a delay in court hearings. Then, the bombshell. Judge Cross herself was assigned to preside over his case. Conflict of interest? Clear as day. But his appeals to have her removed were denied, over and over again. No explanation, no justification. Then came the smear campaign. Suddenly, Adrian was accused of tax evasion. The media picked it up instantly. Tech billionaire faces criminal charges amid lawsuit scandal. Social media exploded. Stocks fell. Sponsors pulled out. Employees began to quit. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the court didn't care. Judge Cross sat on that bench like a queen toying with a prisoner, her voice dripping with disdain every time she uttered his name. Mr. Locke, it's funny how the ones who scream the loudest about corruption always end up being the most corrupt. She denied him key witnesses, blocked digital forensic evidence, discredited expert testimony. Her rulings weren't just biased, they were surgical, designed to dismantle his case piece by piece. Behind closed doors, his legal team was terrified. One of them leaked that Judge Cross had personally threatened to disbar them if they pushed. Too hard. Adrian tried to stay calm, to play it smart, but the humiliation was relentless. Headlines branded him a fraud. Protesters showed up at his home. Board members demanded he step down. He was losing everything, and that's when he realized this wasn't about justice. This was a takedown. People think billionaires are untouchable. That money can shield you from corruption. But when the system turns against you, when the judge, the media, and the government quietly align, you become prey, and no one comes to help the hunted. For Judge Cross, this was personal. Adrian's platform had begun uncovering deep-rooted government surveillance deals, one of which involved her brother-in-law, a senator with a shadowy trail of contracts tied to her court. Adrian had walked into a firestorm he hadn't even meant to ignite, and now, everything he built, his company, his reputation, his legacy, was being erased, not by some hacker or competitor, but by a woman in robes who had decided he needed to be crushed, not because he broke the law, but because he threatened the people. Who do? This is what injustice looks like when it's draped in legitimacy, when the gavel becomes a weapon, and power is protected not by truth, but by silence. But what Judge Cross didn't realize is that silence wasn't in Adrian's nature, and the moment she pushed too far, she unknowingly triggered the one move he'd been preparing for all along. Adrian stared at the courtroom ceiling as the judge's voice faded into white noise. He didn't hear the ruling. Not really. Just the sound of the gavel slamming down like a coffin lid. Motion denied. Again, it was over. His final attempt to present the encrypted server logs, his only shot at proving the connection between Judge Cross and the corrupt corporations, was denied as inadmissible. No explanation, no justification, just a cold stare from the bench, as if daring him to protest. Outside the courthouse, the world continued tearing him apart. Protesters with signs that read "Liar Lock" chanted outside. His company's stock was now at an all-time low. Government auditors had frozen half his assets, and this morning he'd received word that his mother's health insurance under his private company plan had been quietly revoked due to policy violations. He hadn't cried once, not when his legal team quit, not when the media accused him of insider trading, not even when his closest friend, his CTO of 8 years, turned state witness in exchange for immunity. But now, in the privacy of a rented hotel room miles from everything he once called his life, Adrian Locke cried. For the first time since he built his empire, he was alone, utterly, devastatingly alone. And for a moment, he believed them. Maybe he was the villain. Maybe it was arrogance that made him think he could take on an empire, that he could expose the most protected secrets in the country and survive. Maybe he had overstepped. But then, in the silence, his phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number, just one line. She overplayed her hand. Check folder 9C Delta. At first, he dismissed it as another taunt. Trolls had been mocking him for weeks, but something about it felt precise, internal. He opened his encrypted cloud vault. Folder 9C Delta was buried in a backup partition he'd all but forgotten, data from an old whistleblower cache that he never got around to processing. Inside were 3 files, 1 video, 2 audio recordings, and in them, everything changed. The first was security footage from a federal courthouse service corridor, one rarely accessible to anyone outside internal staff. It showed Judge Cross meeting with a man Adrian immediately recognized, Lawrence Keene, CEO of Keene Tech Solutions, a direct competitor to Link Systems. Keene handed her an envelope. She nodded, smiled, walked away. The timestamp? 3 days before she was assigned to Adrian's case. The second recording was a phone call, illegally obtained, clearly, but undeniable. Judge Cross was speaking with a senator, her brother-in-law, discussing how Adrian's platform could unravel the entire surveillance operation if he keeps pushing. Her voice was steady. We need to bury him before the hearings begin. And the final piece, a voice memo from a court clerk, nervous, whispering. I'm sorry, Mr. Locke. I don't know who to trust. But she's not impartial. She's orchestrating this whole thing. You need to look at case number 4142 from last year. It was wiped from the public record, but she ruled on it. And she was paid. Please, get out before they do worse. Adrian sat frozen. In one night, the fog lifted. The humiliation, the denials, the smears. It was never about justice. It was a premeditated strike, coordinated, funded, executed, with Judge Cross as the tip of the spear. And now, she had gone too far. Because in trying to destroy him, she got sloppy, emotional, reckless. And in her arrogance, she'd given him everything he needed. He could leak it all right now. Upload the files to links, send it to the media, go nuclear. But no, that would be too easy, too predictable. She had made a show out of breaking him, turned him into a national disgrace, a symbol of privilege gone wrong. She wanted blood and spectacle. Now, she'd get both, but not his. Adrian made a decision in that dim hotel room, surrounded by silence and shattered trust. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't leak. He would walk back into that courtroom and finish what he started. But this time, he wasn't playing defense. He was setting the trap. The next morning, his legal team received a message. Reinstate. Trial not over. The few who remained hesitated, but followed. Adrian had already begun assembling a private intelligence group. People who owed him favors. Former cybersecurity analysts, digital forensics experts, a disbarred attorney with a memory like a database. They would verify the files, cross-reference connections, dig into bank transfers. Legally, quietly, methodically. He didn't need to scream. He didn't need headlines. He just needed one thing: control of the timing. Because now, for the first time in weeks, Adrian Locke wasn't the one on trial, and Judge Marilyn Cross was running out of time. When Adrian returned to court, he wasn't the same man who'd left it. The weight was gone from his shoulders. His walk was deliberate. His eyes no longer searched for mercy. They scanned the room like a chess master nearing checkmate. Judge Cross barely looked up when he entered. "Let's begin," she said flatly, shuffling through papers. "Final testimony." But Adrian didn't move to the witness stand. Instead, he stood beside his lawyer, who slid a slim manila folder onto the table with the kind of calm that unnerves even the most arrogant judge. "This won't take long," Adrian said, voice even. "Mr. Locke, you are not permitted to make statements." "Actually," his lawyer interrupted, "we're entering new evidence under Rule 60B, relief from judgment due to fraud by the court." Judge Cross froze, just for a second, barely noticeable. But enough. The clerk took the folder, handed it to her. She scanned the first page, and then the colour drained from her face. "This is inadmissible," she snapped, almost too quickly. "Your Honour," Adrian said, "we've verified all sources. The video footage, the audio calls, the bank transfers, all authenticated by an independent federal cyber forensics expert. You know, the one you denied from testifying." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the stenographer paused, eyes wide. Adrian continued, "Let me make this simple. That envelope you took from Lawrence Keene contains a check, $500,000, transferred 2 days later into your husband's offshore account in the Caymans." Cross's jaw clenched. "That phone call you made to Senator Hale, your brother-in-law, was recorded during a federal investigation into government contracts. Links flagged the metadata before this case even went to trial. You said, and I quote, 'If this kid keeps pushing, we'll all be exposed. He has to go down before committee hearings begin.'" "No further statements," Cross barked. "This is a courtroom, not a circus." "Exactly," Adrian replied, "which is why a copy of this entire file has been submitted to the Judicial Oversight Committee and the Department of Justice, including the clerk's voice memo, confessing that she was coerced to withhold evidence under threat of termination." The judge stood up, visibly shaking. "You're bluffing," she hissed. "That's—" When Adrian smiled. "Check your phone." A rustle of whispers broke out in the gallery. She hesitated, then checked. Dozens of missed calls. Unknown numbers, and then one from the DOJ. It had already begun. Because Adrian hadn't just exposed her, he'd turned the courtroom into a trap. The very place she weaponized against him had now become the stage for her downfall. The courtroom doors opened. 2 federal agents stepped in, calmly walking toward the bench. "This is outrageous," Cross shouted. "You have no authority here." "I am a federal judge," the taller agent calmly handed her a document. "You've been served with an immediate suspension pending investigation. Please come with us." "No," she breathed. "This isn't happening. This is all fabricated. He hacked this. He's manipulating." But no one listened, because the moment the agents placed handcuffs on her wrists, the world flipped. The press, once eager to paint Adrian as the villain, now erupted with new headlines. Federal judge arrested in courtroom scandal. Whistleblower tech CEO vindicated. Everything changed in a blink. The prosecution team scrambled. The court, Clark cried openly. Reporters fumbled for cameras, unsure what to film first. Adrian stood still, watching the woman who tried to destroy him be led away in silence. Her face red, her composure shattered, but it wasn't over yet, because the damage she caused couldn't be undone with a single arrest. His company was still bleeding, his name still stained, his employees still afraid. But now he had the one thing she tried to take from him, the truth, and he wasn't done using it. By the time Judge Cross stepped out of that courtroom in cuffs, a full-scale investigation had already begun. 3 other judges were implicated through her communications. Keentech's stock collapsed within 48 hours. The senator resigned quietly 2 weeks later, citing family concerns. Adrian didn't rush back into the spotlight. He spent the next few months rebuilding, rebranding Lynx as more than a data platform. It became a movement, a secure whistleblower ecosystem, anonymous Dropboxes, government-proof encryption, a digital fortress for those who feared the powerful. And every time someone asked him how it really felt to watch the woman who tried to ruin him be exposed, he said the same thing. "She gave me a courtroom. I just gave her a verdict." He never gloated, never ranted, because real power doesn't scream, it whispers. And in that whisper, the entire system began to tremble. Because if someone like Adrian could survive and win, then maybe, just maybe, others could too. 3 months later, Judge Marilyn Cross sat alone in a holding cell, her designer suit exchanged for a grey jumpsuit. Her courtroom dignity replaced by silence and shadows. She still hadn't spoken to the press, still refused to admit guilt. But the walls were closing in, and the evidence, her own voice, her own hand, was undeniable. Her fall wasn't quiet. It was thunderous. Her assets were frozen. Her husband had filed for divorce. Every ruling she made in the past 5 years was now under review, and a dozen civil suits had been filed against her. Her name, once synonymous with justice, was now buried beneath hashtags, headlines, and court transcripts. But that wasn't the true justice. The true justice came not from what she lost, but from what Adrian gained. Lynx was no longer just a tech company. It became a beacon, a lifeline. Whistleblowers from all over the country came forward with stories they'd buried for years. Corrupt officials, rigged contracts, illegal surveillance. And they felt safe, because Adrian had made it safe. The platform went non-profit. Adrian stepped down as CEO, but remained on the board, guiding its mission, ensuring it would never again be silenced by power. And when Congress tried to regulate him out of existence, Adrian walked into the Capitol, not with lawyers, but with survivors. Victims of the very system Judge Cross had upheld. People who had been erased, silenced, ignored. And he let them speak. Their stories went viral. The regulation bill collapsed. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. And yet, his presence haunted those who once laughed at him, including Lawrence Keane. Keane Tech never recovered. The scandal exposed backdoor military contracts, inflated pricing, and surveillance, deals that violated federal law. The company filed for bankruptcy within a year. Keane, stripped of his board seat, disappeared from the public eye. Rumors swirled about exile, lawsuits, and even criminal indictments. Adrian never commented on it. Because for him, revenge wasn't the point. It was about restoring truth. He once told a journalist, "They wanted a headline. I gave them a warning. If a judge can be bought, then justice isn't broken. It's infected. An infection spreads until you cut it out." His words became a quote printed on protest signs, university lecture halls, and even government memos. He didn't seek applause, didn't need vindication, but it found him anyway. Because when you survive the storm and stand taller for it, people notice. At the annual Tech Integrity Summit, he was honored with the Founder's Flame, a rare award given to those who not only innovate, but protect society through technology. His speech lasted 3 minutes. "I built something to expose truth," he said. "They tried to bury it, bury me. But truth doesn't rot, it waits, and when it rises, it doesn't just speak, it roars." The audience gave a standing ovation. Still, Adrian remained humble. He spent his days mentoring startups focused on ethics, privacy, justice. He used his own downfall as a case study, teaching them what happens when you challenge systems that don't want to be challenged. He told them it would hurt, that it would break them, but if they held their ground, if they protected their integrity, they could change everything, because truth doesn't need permission. Months turned into a year. Judge Cross was convicted of obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and judicial misconduct. Sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, she appealed. Of course she did, but this time, no one pulled strings, no one returned calls, no one answered, because the system she relied on to protect her no longer existed. Adrian hadn't just won a case. He dismantled a lie, and in doing so, gave thousands a reason to believe again. He walked past the courthouse one rainy evening, hands in his pockets, unnoticed by most. A young law student recognized him, ran over, breathless. "Mr. Locke, I just wanted to say you inspired me. I want to be a judge someday, but one that earns it, one who listens." Adrian smiled. "Then you'll be dangerous in all the right ways." He walked on, no security detail, no cameras, just a quiet man who once had everything taken and somehow came out richer, not in money, but in purpose. And as the city lights flickered behind him, one thing became clear. He didn't need revenge because justice had already been served.